President Strickwerda, Vice President Ryder, Dean Randazzo, Chair Bob Kerr, fellow trustees in the audience, faculty out there in the audience, administrators, I don't know where all the administrators are, somewhere around here, but there were a lot of them around earlier, and most importantly, 2017 graduates of the School for Continuing and Professional Studies. Thank you all for the honorary degree, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I've told a number of people, most of my public speaking has been on tax matters because I'm a tax attorney by training, so if I launch into some talk about some Pennsylvania Supreme Court case, why just throw up your hand and tell me to shut up and move on, okay? First, let me say congratulations. I think there are about 193 folks graduating or receiving degrees, which would be the undergraduate and the graduate degrees here today. Congratulations to you all. Congratulations to those of you who are here and those of you who couldn't make it. As a 1984 graduate, that's probably ancient to some of you, but I do remember there was one person graduating today who was supposedly age 66. Now, I am older than 66, but only by 1 year, so I felt like I really fit in the group maybe at that point. In any event, as a 1984 graduate from what's now known as the school, at the time we just said it was the evening division or something of the sort, I can attest to the significance of this day as you look forward to the next phase of your life. You all know this, but when I look at this, I say, well, there are different benefits you receive. Some of you probably entered into the program to get your degree to better your position with your existing employer. I suppose I did that to some extent myself. Others probably sought the degree with the idea of either finding new employment or maybe even changing entirely your career. And others, I'm sure, will move on to postgraduate work or another advanced degree. I found myself really kind of fitting into the last two groups. When I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I moved on to go to law school, which not only was graduate work, but also meant I was changing jobs at the same time. Let me give you a little bit of my background. So I think we'll see that kind of my experience probably fits with many of you in the audience. After high school, and I graduated in 1968, which is probably ancient times for many of you. But in any event, in 68 I graduated and I went to an unnamed large public university in Pennsylvania. You can fill in the blank. Usually we take the name in vain around here, but I won't mention it today. And I went there for 4 years, but I didn't really graduate because while I was there for 4 years, I changed majors I don't know how many times, and never graduated. At the end of the 4 years, I went and worked on a political campaign for a little while. My candidate lost, so that didn't work out so good. And then I took a job working for as I think Betty read in that little bio that they asked me to send them somewhere along the way. Anyway, I went to work for the Department of Revenue, kind of a so-so job at the time, but I managed to work my way up. And after a little while there, several years, I had advanced myself to a management level job, and I was doing half decent, But I realized that, at the time, and it's still true to some extent now, if you work for the state, you want to advance beyond a certain level, you have to play politics. And if you play politics and you advance beyond a certain level and the party changes, why, there's a pretty good chance you're not going to have a job when all's said and done. So that didn't really appeal to me, because parties change in Pennsylvania on a pretty regular basis in Harrisburg. So after a point, I realized that, it's time that I need to go back and finish my bachelor's degree, which I should have done, back in 1972. But several years later, I'm working there for the Commonwealth, and I say, I'm not going to get too far here. I better do something. At the same time, of course, I'd leave the Commonwealth, and at the time, I'd kind of seen people who were CPAs and lawyers coming in to deal with the Department of Revenue, and I looked at them and I said, hey, I can do this, I think I can do that. And I looked down at the Department of Revenue's chief counsel's office and saw the lawyers there and said, yeah, hey, I can do this. And so I went back to that large public university and said, hey, folks, I'm serious now. I want to finish my degree. What do I have to do? And basically they said, start over, because they were academic bureaucrats who had rules and said, your credits are too old. Well, they weren't all that old. And you'll have to start over. Well, I didn't like that answer, so I started looking for other options. I don't really know how I connected with E-Town, but I did, and I found some very helpful people at E-Town. I think probably all of them have retired by now who were here at the time. There might have been one or two that worked up until maybe 5 or 6 years ago, something like that. But in any event, very, very helpful folks. I don't know if I got here because, and my uncle's in the audience, he's a 59 graduate of E-Town. His wife graduated from E-Town. I have a few cousins who went to E-Town. But I don't think any of them actually put me on to the evening program at E-Town. I think I just stumbled across the information somehow. You know, we didn't have, the internet at the time. Somehow I got the information. In any event, I came down to E-Town and talked to the folks here, very helpful. And when I told them what this large public university had told me about my credits being too old, E-Town said, oh, no. We'll take your credits, transfer them in. So we transferred my credits in, and I changed majors one more time to become a business major, because I had never done that when I was at this other institution. And that's really what I wanted to do in order to set myself up to go to law school. And I proceeded, to take evening classes. Now, we didn't have online classes at the time. We were strictly, it was strictly, show up in person and take the course. And so I was living in Harrisburg at the time, and I would either drive down here to the campus or I'd drive to the University Center in Harrisburg and take my classes in the evenings. And I'm sure it was kind of the way it probably was for you all. I mean, some of the classes were interesting, some of them, not so much. And there were a few classes that I always said, I don't understand why I'm doing this. One of which was we had to pass a swimming proficiency requirement or a 1-credit course or something in swimming. And I said, what does that have to do with business administration? I don't know what. And then, of course, there were the religion courses that we had to take. And so right up until the last session that I went to school here, I hadn't filled that religion requirement. And so at the last minute, I had to scoot around. And it turns out E-Town didn't offer the religion class at the time. I had to scoot over to Lebanon Valley and grab the class over there in summer of '84, which is when I graduated. So, but I finally got my degree in the summer of '84. And within a week or two, and Chrissy's in the audience, my lifetime significant other, and she probably remembers better than I do, but I think it was the next week. It might have been 2 weeks later that I went to Dickinson, and Betty covered that too. But I have to say, I found, at the time I went there, just to digress slightly, there were all these young kids right out of college that went to law school, I don't know how many of the young kids are among our group here, but most of us are not the young kids that I'm talking about. But I went there saying, I don't know, these kids have been really working their butts off and did pretty well in order to get into law school, and how am I going to stack up? And I just went to this evening program at E-Town, finished up all my work there. I don't know how that stacks up. Well, I'll tell you, it stacked up pretty well, because I managed to do pretty good in law school. Graduated in '87, 3 years later, on time, with my JD, and had served on law review and so forth. Did pretty well, which ended up getting me a good job with a good firm in Harrisburg with McNeese, Wallace, and Nurick, which is still the largest Harrisburg-based law firm. Over the years at McNeese then, as Betty said, a lot of this was in I didn't know you were going to recite all that stuff, or I wouldn't have put it in here too. But in any event, I managed to take my prior experience with the Department of Revenue and kind of build upon that, and develop the state tax practice at McNeese, and enhance the firm's reputation on both a statewide and national basis for people doing Pennsylvania tax work. And then after not quite 30 years, I retired at the end of 2015. Looking back to my time going to law school after I was here at E-Town and working at McNeese, looking back, not only did I benefit from getting my degree, the piece of paper. I needed that piece of paper, that bachelor's degree, in order to go to law school, which was my objective at the time. But not only did I benefit from getting that piece of paper, that credential that I needed, but as the years went by, I really learned how much I really benefited from the substantive side of things in the E-Town courses. One guy I remember pretty well is Jim Hess, who's a CPA in Harrisburg, and he was teaching evening classes in financial accounting at the time. I don't think Jim has taught here lately, but he's still practicing as a CPA in Harrisburg. Jim had his quirks. He had a few catchphrases that he would repeat several times during the class, and we'd all kind of look at each other and say, there, he did it again, kind of thing. But the fact of the matter is, I learned a good bit about financial accounting from him in those classes. And I found out over the years, as I was working through my cases, my tax cases, and you might say, well, it's just tax, what's it have to do with accounting? Well, when you're working on a tax case, you have to understand the accounting underpinnings for the transactions as well as the legal underpinnings. So I found out over the years that basis, that grounding that I received from Jim Hess really served me well. And I'm sure there were other classes that I took that have come back to, over the years to really be a benefit to me, but that's one in particular that I remember very well. And I remember taking on cases 20 years after I graduated from law school, and I'd be sitting there looking at these SEC documents or tax documents or whatever else the company had given me, and they started talking about all this accounting stuff, and I'm saying, what the heck is all this? But then I started, stop, think, and kind of go back to the basics, pull the books off the shelf, look up the rules, do some reading, and with that foundation that Jim had given me in those financial accounting courses here, I was able to then sort my way through all these cases. I have to tell you, practicing law is not all about the law. A lot of it's about the facts. Everybody probably agrees what the law is on a lot of things, but if you don't know what the facts are, you don't know whether you meet the requirements of the law or not. So understanding the accounting underpinnings, the actual factual underpinnings of a case can be very important. Also looking back, I have to say, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't hooked up with E-Town. I was working for the Commonwealth. I was not doing too badly, making enough money to live on and so forth. If I hadn't hooked up with E-Town, if the people here hadn't been so helpful to me, I don't know what I would have done. I might have stayed with the Commonwealth, and I might have retired from the Commonwealth at some mid-level management position, within the last 5 years. But I didn't. The folks at E-Town were very helpful to me and really helped me to get my career back on track. And I've often said over the years that I think that the helpfulness I found at E-Town really accounts for much of my subsequent professional success. I know that you may not know it yet, but you're going to benefit pretty much the way I have from obtaining your degree here. There'll be some immediate benefit. You'll have the piece of paper, the employer will be happy, or some new employer will be happy, or if you want to go to grad school, have the credential you need. But I think you'll find out, as I did over the years, that what you learned here will actually serve you well as you work your way through your career. 20 years from now, I bet you'll find something that in your work, that you'll touch on, that all of a sudden the bell will go off and you'll remember one of these folks sitting back here who taught your course and helped you work your way through it. And it'll all come back to you and say, yeah, that works here, that fits. I have to say also that the benefit I received from E-Town and the helpfulness shown to me by the folks here, and really more the helpfulness of the folks as opposed to just getting my degree. That really impressed me about Elizabethtown. And that's why I've been more than willing over the years to give some time and effort to the school, not to the college, but also to the school, what's now the School of Continuing and Professional Studies. What did it used to be called anyway? It used to be called Continuing Ed. Okay, it was the evening division to me, whatever. I've long been a believer, and many of you have figured this out as well, because you've been out in the world for a while. There are a lot of things that need to be done out in the community, and if people don't step forward and volunteer, some of those things just will never get done, and they're things that need to be done. And I've said a number of times to people, if those of us who have acquired certain skills, certain expertise, who have maybe resources, if those of us who have the wherewithal to help out, if we don't step forward, then who will? And I think the answer is probably no one will. It really falls on us as professionals who have prepared ourselves and continue to learn throughout life. It falls on us to take those skills and bring them to bear on behalf of our fellow human beings. I've obviously spent a lot of time working with the college. I mean, if you find yourself in a position to do the same, if you want to help out at the school, if you want to do something else with the college, and I'm not just talking about money, of course, Carl and Dave Beitelman, or wherever he is, will always have their hand out. If you want to give them a few bucks, they'll be more than happy to accept that. But there are many other things you can do at the college. But I suspect that quite a number of you are probably saying, well, I've had enough of school for now. I have other interests. Well, you know, I'm sure you can find ways that have nothing to do with the college where you can provide service to others. I paid a little bit of attention the last while to reports of other speakers at commencements, and I won't mention Trump, so we'll just skip over his speeches. But in any event, you know, usually there's some grandiose objective that they're talking about, or every now and then somebody says, you should get involved in politics and all that kind of stuff. And I hope maybe someone in this audience, maybe in this group, will actually achieve one of those grandiose objectives. Maybe somebody here will run for statewide or national office. That would be wonderful. I'd love to see, you know, the background summary for some national candidate or statewide candidate say, you know, graduated from the School of Continuing Professional Studies at Elizabethtown College. I might even vote for you. Or maybe not. It all depends. But most of us don't particularly want to play on a big statewide or national stage. But there's still a lot of things I think that we can do. And I just use myself as an example of things that I've done to give you some ideas, and many of you have been out in the working world for some years. You already know a lot of this, but some of the activities I've found to be satisfying over the years have included church activities and service clubs like the Lions Clubs. I think I've been a Lion for like 40 years. And you might say, well, they've got all these crazy little things they say in their meetings, but most of us don't actually do that kind of stuff anymore. But what we do is we provide services to kids. Other folks who don't particularly like those kind of organizations, they might get involved in the school board. I mean, what a thankless job. You know, pays nothing, and you catch all kinds of heck from everybody, because you're never right in the eyes of some people. Local government, which again, pays next to nothing. Local boards and commissions, which probably do pay nothing. I mean, those are things that we can all jump in if we have an interest. You know, find something you have an interest in and get involved in it. Some folks find an interest in participating in professional organizations. I happen to hook up with the tax section of the Pennsylvania Bar. And you're probably thinking, well, this is an organization to benefit lawyers. And yeah, that's true. But we did some things too that benefited other folks. Every now and then the Revenue Department would try to run something up the flagpole in the legislature, and we'd look at it and say, this stinks. Might say something worse than that. This is a polite occasion here. You know, and we wouldn't hesitate on at least a few occasions to approach the people up in the legislature and say, you know, hey, you understand what they're really trying to do is this. So even in a professional organization like the Bar Association, you can get involved in things that actually affect other people. And I would encourage you, if you have an interest that kind of sticks with your professional life, why, that's one direction you can go in. And finally, there's just a lot of other nonprofit organizations out there that you can help with that will, I'm sure, enrich your life, make you feel better about things. E-Town, obviously, the college fits in that category, and you know, I've done many things over the years. Before Carl was here, they were, you know, roping me in to be on some search committees. Ted Long had me on some Strategic Planning Committee, probably the first one that he had. I think it was because I was an alum. I was a lawyer, so I had control of my own kind of schedule, and I was in Harrisburg, so I was close by, and so they put me on this committee, and all the faculty members of the committee, I think, thought that I was a board member and I had lots of money, but it wasn't exactly true. It wasn't true at all, really. But in any event, I've done a lot of things at the college, and I've enjoyed doing that, and you can do the same. It doesn't have to be with the college. I mean, there are many other organizations. I think of every now and then I see the Alumni Council circulating emails about food bank evenings, people getting together at the food banks and helping out. There's Salvation Army, Bethesda Mission, which is a shelter in Harrisburg. There's a similar shelter in Lancaster. I don't remember the name. These organizations are things that we can all get involved with that will enrich our lives and will help other people. And these organizations, they can't afford to pay people to do all this stuff. They need volunteers. And it's not just physical labor necessarily, although sometimes it is that, but you now have acquired certain skills, certain expertise through your work here at E-Town. As you work in the workplace and you further develop your skills, you'll become more expert at certain things. Maybe some of you in finance, some of you more human relations kind of things. But these organizations can use people like you. Bring your expertise to the table, bring a new viewpoint to the table. And basically what I'm saying is, having gone through E-Town, you get the immediate benefit of maybe you get a promotion at work or you find a new job or whatever. But you've also acquired expertise and the real ability to go out there and deal with other people and help other people. And life is much more satisfying if you do more than just try to advance yourself. So I hope that not only will you experience the benefit, the immediate benefit from getting the degree, but that you'll realize a long-standing benefit from your experience here at E-Town. And I hope that you will, consistent with the slogan of the college, educate for service, will go out there and help other folks along the way. As I said earlier, if we who have developed the skills and the ability, if we who have the resources, who have the wherewithal to help out, if we don't do it, then who will? I'd like to say thank you for listening to me. I didn't see anybody go to sleep yet, so I appreciate that. I'm looking forward, perhaps, I saw some tents out here. I said, what kind of refreshments are we going to have? And I was informed that there was no alcohol included, so I was disappointed, but I imagine some of us will still hang around nonetheless. I look forward to shaking a few hands and talking to folks afterwards. And just let me say again, congratulations and best wishes for success in your future. Thank you.